will look at our health from a new perspective.
Far out, man.
Tackling the toughest topics and putting their own bodies under the microscope.
Pretty tight in here. Feel like I'm trapped.
For a fresh take on the pulse of the nation.
So your body hasn't decided that this is normal?
I, for one, am not going to argue with science.
Ask the Doctor starts Tuesday at 8 on ABC and iView. A spy story more incredible than any thriller.
It's the most toxic substance known to man. It's a million times a lethal dose.
Now, for the first time, investigators speak out.
A state-sponsored killing in London. This was something completely out of the ordinary.
Foreign Correspondent, Tuesday.
Tonight on ABC and iView, sporting legend Ian Thorpe opens up on a moving Arn's brush with fame. Then the weekly, and you can't ask that.
And on ABC2, why are some mannequins headless? Get the answer to that and other philosophical questions on Dirty Jobs.
Today, Federal Treasurer Scott Morrison delivers the annual post-budget address from Parliament's Great Hall. His second budget included billions of dollars for education and infrastructure, plus changes in health and housing. Scott Morrison with today's National Press Club address.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club, coming to you from the Great Hall in Parliament House for our traditional post-budget address. And if you want to join our conversation online, then our hashtag is NPC and our Twitter handle is @PressClubAUST. Well, the stage is set. There is much to discuss. I will not delay it. Will you please welcome the Treasurer of Australia, Scott Morrison.
Well, hashtag good afternoon, I suppose, is the appropriate welcome. Thank you all for being here today. It's great to see so many of you here interested in what we've announced in the budget last night. I particularly want to acknowledge my colleagues who are here, who are numerous and many, but particularly the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party is here with us today, and Matthias Cormann, the Finance Minister, and a partner in this budget we've worked so closely together on with the Prime Minister, the Small Business Minister, Michael McCormick, who I can see here, and I think I saw Christian Porter as well here, who has been a member of our ERC team, Darren Chester. I'm doing the full roll call now. We'll be here all day if I keep going. It's wonderful to have my colleagues here with me today who have been such an important part of pulling this budget together. Can I also say it's great to see Jenny? Haven't seen her for a little while. She was down last night. It's great to have her here today, and it's great to have my brother-in-law Gary and sister-in-law Michelle here today, and I want to talk about them a little later in my presentation. This is a budget that is about fairness, it's about security, it's about opportunity. It's a budget that understands that we need to make the right choices to secure what I believe are better days that are coming for our nation and for our world economically. It understands the new reality that we're working in this place. Canberra's a strange place. People watching onto this program, I think, understand that. And there's quite a strange gathering of my best friends in the media here as well, to joining with politicians. That's not a usual crowd that gets together for lunch on any day of the week out there in Australia. But here we all are today, looking in on what happens inside Canberra on a day like today. But the new reality is, it is governing the way budgets are now done. A reality requiring practical budgets, credible budgets, where we must take reasonable and measured approaches to, above all, get things done. Australians are tired of the politics. They want the politicians they elect to get things done. That's what matters. Not the ideology and the politics and the personalities and all the things so many people in this place focus on endlessly. But outside of here, they don't. They want to know what we're doing here to get things done for them. And increasingly, that means in this parliament, wherever we can, meet in the middle to make sure that happens. That means many of us have to move from positions we've been holding previously. We have to. Otherwise, we all just run around this building making excuses to people as to why nothing's happened. And that won't cut it in this new reality of Australian politics. This is a budget that recognises that Australians aren't interested in those political games. They are interested in governments that will focus on getting things done. And as Chris Richardson would know, budgets have to be credible. The forecasts have to be real, and we'll debate those amongst economic circles when all the economists get together. That's a great lunch, that one. And we'll pore over that, but they have to be credible. And I want to commend John Fraser and Nigel Ray and the team at Treasury for the excellent work they've done in pulling these Treasury forecasts together in this budget. They're real, they're credible, they are conservative, and I think they can be relied upon in terms of the documents which we've presented in this budget. In this budget, we have sought to make the right choices to secure these better days ahead. It's exactly what we've endeavoured to do. It's a fair budget, it's an honest budget, and it's a responsible budget. And there's a lot in it. I think as Australians, perhaps, I'm not going to be so vain to think they stayed with us for the full 30 minutes of the speech, let alone the hours of coverage that followed later, that all of us in this building seem to watch. But there was a lot in it, and there'll be time to digest as a nation what we've announced last night, and to absorb it and understand it, and see that we are identifying problems that Australians feel and understand, and we're putting forward solutions practically to those problems. In some cases, we're running trials. We've run trials before. Alan Tudge is here. The cashless debit card has been a tremendous tribute to Alan's efforts in this area. When we brought it in, people were saying, oh, you can't do that, that'll never work, communities won't accept it. Well, guess what? They have. And we're expanding it, as we should, because we're not a government that is afraid to try things. And if they don't work, guess what? We'll stop doing them. And if they do work, guess what? We'll keep doing them and we'll expand them, because that's what practical people do. Practical people who aren't pushed to and fro by ideology and personalities and things of that nature. So I'm just going to focus in on a few things today. It was a very comprehensive budget, and I just want to focus on a few items, and I'm sure that the media colleagues who are here today will be able to pick up the issues that they want to raise specifically in questions. Gary and Michelle Warren are extraordinary Australians. And forgive me as I try and get through this, as Gary will too. They live in Peakhurst Heights in southern Sydney, in the same home Gary grew up in. They have 4 sons. Gary's mum lives upstairs. Her and Roy, who we lost not that long ago, raised their family in this house. And Gary's younger sister is my wife Jenny. The oldest of their boys, we all went to his wedding in January of this year. He studied at Wollongong University and he's now studying at Bible College. We're very proud of him. Their other 2 middle brothers, they're both completing apprenticeships. One works for a plumber in the Shire. And the youngest of the 4 boys is at a local independent school, and he's a very bright young boy, and he's doing incredibly well. After Gary left school, he trained to become a fireman, something he really wanted to do. In my family, my father was a policeman, my brother's an AMBO, and my brother-in-law was a fireman, so we've pretty much got the services covered. I'm the politician, they don't talk about that. My mum does. He loved his job. He was passionate about being a fireman. He did it for 20 years. It's a very physical guy, Gary, I remember. Going on hikes, canyoning. I wasn't doing that, he was. Very physical guy, he had a very physical job, and it was a very physically demanding job. But in 1999, Gary was diagnosed with progressive MS. It's the aggressive form of MS, and he knew it at the time. The oldest son at that time was just 8 years old. Their youngest son hadn't even been born. He remained with the Fire Brigade for another 5 years, and we both thank the New South Wales Fire Brigade for the tremendous support they gave to Gary over that period of time. They did everything they could for him, and he still does some work with them now today. And after doing that, they changed his duties to ensure that he could continue to work with the Fire Brigade and share his experience as a trainer with other young Fire Brigade officers. Gary was able to draw down after he left the Fire Brigade on an annuity, but he has kept working and sought to work every single day from then till now. Because of his annuity, he hasn't had to draw down on a disability support pension. He hasn't claimed on Newstart. The family is supported by the carers payment and equally a mobility payment, as should be the case. Gary has worked at the 000 call centre for the ambulance service. He's worked for call centres at Fair Trading and court systems in New South Wales, where he does a great job. He's amazing with people. He can explain anything to anyone. In fact, he should probably be up here explaining this. When their youngest son went to preschool, Michelle went back to the Australian Catholic University, and she trained to be a school teacher. 5 years raising 4 boys, studying, supporting Gary. That's a big job, and it's a tremendous tribute to her of what she's been able to achieve. And a few months ago, they bought their first home. An incredible achievement. For the last 5 years or so, as you can see, Gary is now in the chair. Before that, he had a Segway, and at family events, everyone loved riding the Segway. Gary would show us how it was done. I remember doing it myself one day. It was a pretty poor effort. But for the last 5 years, that's how he's got himself around. And recently, when the van was off the road that he used, Gary had to catch public transport. At the time, he was working in Parramatta. That's an hour and a half, both ways, from where they live on public transport. That's committed to working. But Gary told me just how helpful his fellow commuters, his fellow Australians were. People, he's told me, are enormously generous, not just happy to help, but keen to help. And he said, it's not flash being disabled. It's not flash. But if there's anything good about it, he said, it's that you're disabled in Australia. That's an incredibly generous statement about the big heart of Australians. He and I both know that they have big hearts, and I don't know a finer man than Gary Warren. So last night, I was very proud to declare that as a Treasurer in the Turnbull government, we would fully fund the National Disability Insurance Scheme. That's what this is about, that story. Guaranteeing this vital service for Australians desperately in need of care and support, and they deserve it. We're asking Australians to chip in for this compassionate cause through a 0.5% levy in 2 years' time, in addition to the Medicare levy. And we strike the levy when the bills come in, not before. That's when the increased bills come in on the NDIS. That's when the unfunded component of the NDS starts. And that's when we'll be asking Australians to come to the table and share with all of us to ensure that this program can be delivered. Australians look after their mates, particularly those who are less fortunate than ourselves. It's our nature, it's our values as a country, and that's what fully funding the NDIS is all about. And it's important that we now end the political debate about how it's funded. We tried to fund it through savings. We respect the fact that the Parliament and the Senate in particular rejected those savings. But I'm not saying no to Gary and the 500 other thousand Australians who are counting on this have asked for nothing, but we deserved for them to show our support. So we should end the political games around this, and we should gather together and meet in the middle as a parliament and finish the funding job that was started. Coming together in the middle as a parliament to maintain support for this important program. That's what the change is about to the Medicare levy. Reflecting our values, helping our mates and doing what Australians always do for those in need. And so I call on the parliament to support us in this important effort as a team, as Australians expect us to do. Now I want to talk about Simon and Megan Turner. They're oyster farmers. Rowan Ramsey knows them. Rowan and I came into the parliament together almost 10 years ago. They farm oysters for domestic and overseas markets at their business, Turner's Oyster Farm in South Australia. And they treat their 10 employees like the family blood runs through their veins. That's not surprising, given Turner's aquaculture was started as a family business by Simon's parents. They wanted to take charge of their destiny, to better themselves and pass on the opportunity they created with their own bare hands to Simon. Funnily enough, Simon wants to do the same thing for his own 2 kids, despite them being too young to object at this point in time. But before he does that, he wants to grow the business. And you know, of course he can, because last night, to back him in, we announced a further extension of the instant asset write-off rules for another 12 months, giving businesses with an annual turnover of up to $10 million. That's 5 times what it was when we first started this program several years ago, with the chance to instantly deduct the cost of equipment and assets less than $20,000 in value. It's a policy that Simon is very familiar with. He's used it in the past to free up some cash flow and help his business function more efficiently. And the good news for the local boat shop owner down there is Simon's coming your way. He let us know he'll be using the instant asset write-off this year again to buy some more outboard motors and oyster grading equipment, a purchase he wouldn't have made without this measure being in place. And courtesy of our small business tax cuts we delivered and legislated in the weeks leading up to the budget and I announced in last year's budget, Turner's Oyster Farm now pays a tax rate of 27.5%, and well before his kids take over the business, that rate will be 25%. This is pretty helpful when they freely tell us that their business runs close to the line, like so many small businesses. They're true champions of our economy, and they deserve our respect and our support, and the Turnbull government continues to back them in. The Turners are what this budget is about. Now there's Joel and Ashley Thompson, who are blessed to live in the Shire. A hooray just went up somewhere in southern Sydney for all of those of you. 4 days a week, Ashley heads out the door to work as a personal assistant, and Josh drives trucks for a Sydney Metro trucking company. After a day with their grandmother, Ma, their 2 children go to the childcare centre 3 days a week, taking up a large chunk of the household budget. A bit less now as a result of the childcare affordable reforms we've passed. It means the Thompson family has had to be pretty diligent to keep a lid on their spending, like the government needs to, given that rent gobbles up a fair chunk of their take-home. They're not excessive. They often balk at the idea of going out to dinner, as so many Australians know, or to the movies. And they are very proactive to ensure their power bills are affordable, turning off power points before bed. Despite putting away savings for several years, Josh and Ashley think it will take about 5 or 6 more years before they have enough money for a home deposit, and that's at current Sydney house prices. Our critics say we can't help the Thompsons, that the levers to tackle housing affordability are only in the hands of state governments, and that this couple is merely at the mercy of market conditions. But we can't afford to sit on our hands and watch the fond ideals of the great Australian dream slip from the hands of the Thompsons. That's why we're helping first home buyers, like the Thompsons, by allowing them to use their own salary that they've worked for, to sacrifice it, and to put it into a ready-made account that gives them a tax advantage, and it means that they will get to their dream of home ownership on their own savings 30% faster. If you could move 30% faster, you'd go there, wouldn't you? And that's what we've done with our First Home Super Savers account in bringing that into being. But it is not the only thing that we've been doing to address housing affordability, to take that pressure off those rising costs of living. We are acting in partnership with state and territory governments to boost supply by ensuring that the money that we provide to state and territory governments each year under the previous affordable housing agreement is a two-way street, not a one-way ATM. And we're expecting states and territories to meet targets to build more homes in every state and territory in this country. And we're expecting them to do it by streamlining their planning systems and dealing with the regulations that frustrate development and supply. And we're working with those state and territory governments to do just that. We're forming a Commonwealth Land Bank of all Commonwealth land to ensure that developers know the land that's there and available for them to put more homes. And in Maribyrnong and Melbourne, 6,000 homes will be able to be built on that land. And I'm not just talking just the straight-out detached dwellings. I'm talking about affordable housing. I'm talking about social housing. I'm talking about private rental housing. I'm talking about first homeowner housing. I'm talking about housing for people who are changing in life, disabled accommodation. It can do all of those things. And we're launching the $1 billion National Housing Infrastructure Facility to fix infrastructure bottlenecks at a micro level, working with state and territory and local governments, micro city deals, to ensure that we can clear the way so those homes can be built. And on affordable housing, we've introduced a package which hasn't been seen for some time. The National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation is offering low-cost long-term finance to community housing associations to build more affordable homes. Foreign investors will be able to invest in affordable housing development and owning affordable housing in this country. And that's where they'll get the tax incentive, not to compete with first home buyers who are out there in the market trying to buy their first home. We'll welcome and channel that foreign investment into building the housing we need, which is affordable accommodation. And so much of the housing debate talks about Sydney and Melbourne, but there are people living in Hobart who are paying more than 50% of their income in rent, and this addresses their need. We've also announced $375 million for those who slept rough last night while I was delivering the budget. The National Partnership Agreement Against Homelessness is a fine initiative. It was started by our predecessors in the former government. We backed it then, and I've backed it as a Social Services Minister and now as Treasurer. We've renewed it on several occasions, and now I'm making it permanent, because people who sleep rough, who are feared of being homeless, people who are suffering from domestic violence, people who are young and are couch surfing, whether it's in my electorate in Cronulla or across the other side of the country in Western Australia, in the suburb of, in the town of Bunbury. That funding reaches them, and it works with community organisations, not-for-profit organisations, who know how to deliver on the ground to fix those problems. And for those who are downsizing, we're saying downsize, and you can invest proceeds up to $300,000 back into your superannuation without penalty, non-concessional contribution. Whatever your level, if you've reached the cap, it won't matter. We're allowing you to invest that back in, and that ensures that you're in a position to be able to boost your own retirement income as a result and not be penalised because of your downsizing. And you know, those who say that the Super Saver account is somehow going to undermine people's superannuation savings, that's just a political trick. That's just an ideological opposition to something they didn't think of themselves. This is about people using their own savings. If they're not going to put it in their super account, they're just going to put it in a bank account and pay more tax on it. They're still paying their mandatory contributions, so don't fall for that one. The reason others have said they're not going to support this is because they just want to play politics. And that approach is actually going to help young people to ensure they can get into a house. And there'll be other opportunities later to go into more detail when it comes to these comprehensive package that we put together on housing, using the scalpel, not the chainsaw, making sure that on foreign investors that we put back the cap on what they can borrow, so what they can buy in residential real estate, That cap was actually lifted by the former Labor government. It was actually lifted by Chris Bowen himself. I'm putting it back on. And on top of that, we're removing the capital gains tax exemption for principal residents for foreign investors. And we're tightening up the compliance to make sure they pay their CGT as well. We're tightening up the depreciation arrangements and other deductions for visiting your investment properties as well, and you won't get a deduction for that. So we're tightening it up, we're making it fairer. But at the end of the day, you've got to have a scalpel, not a chainsaw, to deal with this, otherwise you run the great risk of causing a housing shock which can have ripple effects right through the economy. Now, when you pore over all the budget numbers, you see something which you will always see in a coalition government budget, and that is we live within our means, and we've charted a fair and responsible path back to budget balance. Since our re-election, we were able to get $25 billion in budget improvement measures implemented, getting things done since the last election. We've also been able, since we were elected, to reduce the rate of growth in debt by 2/3. We've ensured that our rate of growth in spending as a government has fallen from over 3.5% in what we inherited down to less than 2%, and that remains over the budget and forward estimates. And what we've ensured is we get back to balance in 2021, as has now been included in the budget papers now for the last 2 years and the last 2 mid-year statements. For 4 successive statements, we've projected the balance would be in 2021, and we've dealt with every challenge that has come our way, including the Senate's rejection of $13.5 billion in savings measures that we have now reset in this budget. And we've still ensured that we've got back to budget and balance, and we've done it in a fair way, and we've done it in a responsible way. And we've also done it, as you can see from the chart on the right-hand side, if you're facing the stage, which shows that it stays in balance over the medium term, and we remain below the tax to GDP cap of 23.9%, which we apply to ourselves. And the dotted line you can see there is what happens when you don't apply such a cap. And that's the line that you'll find on the trajectory of what Labor says their balance will be. That's the higher tax approach. Taxes will always be lower under a coalition government. The other thing we've done, and we might skip forward too, Claire, that point, just if you just go back one, what that shows is that this year's budgeted expenditure as a share of the economy is actually lower over all of the forward estimates than what I said would be last year. So for those who say we're not keeping expenditure under control, that's the chart. Expenditure falls to 25% of GDP, and it hasn't been there for a while. But we've also been respecting future taxpayers, and this is where I wanted to finish. I owe a lot to Peter Costello, finest treasurer this country has ever had. I don't think I'm troubling him on that front yet. Might take me another 10 years, but I'll give it a crack. He's a great treasurer. He's a great Australian. I admire him immensely, as you all know. He set up the Future Fund. He set up the Future Fund to ensure that unfunded superannuation liabilities would be paid for and that future generations wouldn't be burdened by them. The decision we've taken in this budget is to not draw down on the Future Fund in 2021. Now, we could. Peter actually wrote the legislation that said we could. But the cost of that is quite dramatic if we do draw on it. If we hold on for another 10 years and don't draw down on that fund, it means that after that period of time it'll reach maturity and go to a point where all of the unfunded superannuation liabilities will be paid for and they'll draw down together, as you can see on that right-hand side chart. On the left-hand side chart, it shows that if you raid the fund now, the fund depletes quickly, but the liabilities remain. This is a century decision. There is a century of taxpayers that will benefit from us holding our discipline and holding our nerve and continuing to build that future fund up for another decade. And that is certainly our intention, and that's what we want to do, and that's why you shouldn't draw down on it. And you can be pretty sure Peter made that argument to you very, very persuasively, and he was right, and Matthias and I agreed with him, and that's what we've chosen to do. The last point I make on debt is this. While we go back into budget balance on the underlying cash balance in 2021, there will be another important date before that. I've talked about how debt is treated in this budget, and I've provided greater transparency on how debt has been allocated in this budget. From 2018-19, just over a year away, we will no longer be borrowing new borrowings to pay for everyday expenditure. That is what living within your means means. In just over a year, by continuing to keep our expenditure under control, to continue to be on a responsible and fair path to budget balance, it means that you don't borrow and put the cost of today's expenditure on future generations. That's what this government is doing. That's what this budget delivers. We've made the right choices to secure the better days ahead in this budget. Choices to grow the economy to secure more and better paying jobs. Choices to guarantee the essentials that Australians rely on. Choices to put downward pressure on rising cost of living, and the choice to ensure the government continues to live within its means. These aren't slogans. I said last night, they once accused me of a slogan called "Stop the Boats." It wasn't a slogan, we turned it into an outcome. These aren't slogans or statements. It's what we intend to do, it's what we are doing, it's what we're going to get done. These are the pillars that underpin everything we now do as a government, based on the principles of fairness and security and opportunity, to keep the government moving forward in its responsibilities so the nation can move forward. This is what Australians expect of a government that is in the job to do the job, and that's what this budget does. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so as we move to questions from our assembled journalists, can I appeal to my colleagues? We have a very long list. Could you limit yourself to one question each? And could I say before I call our first questioner that the Press Club board was devastated, as were the rest of the media, to hear of the latest mass job losses at Fairfax. So, Mark, welcome back to work.
Thank you very much, Chris. And Treasurer, thank you for your address. You've said yesterday and today this is an honest budget. In it, you've consigned, as you said, about $13.5 billion worth of zombie measures to the dust heap. They're no longer in the budget. Can I ask you, was it therefore wrong for you to pursue those measures for so long, given that you have come up with what I think most people would say is a very moderate and optimistic budget and a constructive budget, but without those measures in it? And therefore, did the Senate and the opposition parties actually save the government and the nation from those harsh measures?
We had 25 billion reasons to ensure that we kept pursuing those measures after the last election, because that is the sum of budget improvement measures that we were able to implement after the last election. Those measures were designed to deal with problems, and previous treasurers, every treasurer has to deal with the problems that are in front of them. And that's what previous Treasurer Joe Hockey had to do, working with Matthias then as well as Matthias works with me now. And you're focused on dealing with those problems. And we put forward those measures and we pursued them, and the vast majority of them were able to be passed, and there remained 14.7 billion, or roughly there in total, and 13.5 net that were unable to be pursued. But no one can accuse us of not having tried to pursue them as far as we can. And in fact, when you dealt with the ratings agency, as I was last year, they wanted to see that we were getting progress on those measures, and over the back half of last year we demonstrated that, and I think that was affirmed when they affirmed our AAA credit rating at the end of last year. They said, they were clearly looking to the next budget, and we tried to get more of them through, and did, and now we've made the decision to reset, and I think that underlines the credibility of the budget. But at the same time, being able to hold on to the 2021, in fact improve on the 2021 projected surplus, and ensure we maintain that very cautious and I think conservative approach on our forecast underscores, I think, the financial wisdom of the decisions we've taken in this budget. So 25 billion reasons that future taxpayers and current will thank us for, that we continue to pursue those savings.
The Guardian.
Hello, Treasurer. Catherine Murphy from The Guardian. Given you seem to be meeting the most political resistance today in funding the NDIS because of your decision to share the costs of that down the income scale. So could I ask why the government didn't impose the costs of funding the NDIS on high income earners? Why have you spread it down the income scale?
Well, we do, Kath. I mean, if you earn more money, you're paying a higher levy. If you earn less money, you pay a lower levy. And for lower income earners, particularly low income earners, they don't pay the Medicare levy at all. And if you have more children, there's a higher cut-in rate on income for those families. I mean, this is an insurance levy. We're all affected by it. I've shared with you my personal story on this today from my family. I could go to every table, I suspect, and get a similar story or an associated story. This is all of our responsibility. All of us, but for the grace of God, could find ourselves in that situation, and we'd be expecting and hoping that our mates would be looking after us. So we're all mates as Australians, and we all have a responsibility in this area. And I don't agree that people have reacted in the way that you said. When it was first introduced, Australians accepted it, and I see no reason why the Parliament can't come together again and do that again. This isn't about ideology. This isn't about setting people against each other. This is about all of us accepting that we've got a responsibility, and I think Australians are big. They're big enough to understand what this is about. It comes in when the bills come in. And in the future, a coalition government would love to reduce personal income taxes. We did it last year. I'd love to do it again if we're in a position to do that. And if we do that, the NDIS is still secure. Whatever happens with the tax rates in the future, the NDIS is guaranteed. And that's what we're doing, and that's why it should be supported. And I believe Australians will support it because they've got big hearts and they look after their mates.
The Australian.
Thanks, Chris. G'day, Treasurer. David Crowe from The Australian. Thanks for your speech. Thanks for telling us Gary's story as well. Further to Catherine's question, there has been some discussion this morning about the tapering of the Medicare levy and the Medicare levy increase, because of course somebody up to $21,000 doesn't pay it at all, but then it ramps up to around $50,000. Now, you want to get it legislated. I presume you want to get it legislated fast. Are you open to adjusting the way it tapers in order to get something through the Senate?
Well, the Medicare levy is well understood, and there are exemptions to the Medicare levy. I mean, for example, service people have special concessions under the Medicare level. I don't think people would disagree with that. Blind pensioners have exemptions under the Medicare levy. We haven't tampered with the way that the Medicare levy operates. We've simply applied the increase to how it's currently structured. Now, if there are other debates about the whole Medicare levy, how that should all be structured, that's a different discussion. That's a completely different discussion. We can simply put a further 0.5% on in 2 years, and we can fully fund this thing. And we can end the political debates that are occurring about its funding, and then we can now work together on delivering it across the country and explaining to Australians what they're paying for. Australians still have concerns about the NDIS, don't get me wrong. They don't trust too many governments with these things ever, and they want to make sure that their money's well spent and people with disabilities get the support. People with disabilities have serious questions about how this is going to work. I want to be spending our government's time solving those problems, not fighting with the Labor Party and other people about how it should be funded. I'm over that discussion, and so are disabled Australians, and I think so are most Australians. So let's end it. Let's end it. Let's back this and move on to the next job.
The Australian Financial Review.
Laura Tingle from the Financial Review, Treasurer. I just want to touch on a couple of things you've said. One of them was a very lovely graph you had about the underlying cash balance projected, which goes nice and flat.
Like that one.
It's a nice one, yep. You notice that in the budget papers it says that it's based on tax receipts being assumed to remain constant as a share of GDP, which is adopted for technical purposes,
Correct.
Effectively reflecting your cap of 23.9% of revenue.
Correct.
Now, some people have been questioning your wages forecasts, but let's presume that they're right. The bottom line is, what happens to bracket creep? Doesn't all of this suggest that there is the room next year for you to give tax cuts to address bracket creep? And can you just give us a clear statement on what your position is on bracket creep before the next election?
Well, I demonstrated my position on bracket creep last year when we ensured that 500,000 Australians who would be on a full-time ordinary wage wouldn't go into the second highest tax bracket. That's what I think about bracket creep, that wherever I can do something about it, I'll do something about it. And you're right to say that the medium-term projection of our surplus position, we constrain by ensuring that taxes remain less than 23.9% of GDP. That's what we do. And what that assumes is, on the graph you would have seen the difference between the dotted line and the straight line. And what the technical assumption is that governments will take decisions when that tax cap is a threat of being breached to ensure that taxes remain below that level. Now, we're committed to taking that approach. I noticed in the last election that the Labor Party didn't commit to that, but we certainly intend to follow that practice.
And do something before the next election?
Well, it's a function of the numbers, Chris, and that shows that we remain under the tax to GDP cap for the full 4 years of the forward estimates.
News.com.au.
Malcolm Farr from news.com.au. Treasurer, thanks for your address and for the well-deserved salute you gave your family.
Thank you.
You've held open the prospect to the banks of a $7 billion tax cut somewhere down the line, but last night you then increased taxes on the banks by $6 billion. Isn't this a concession by you that not all big corporations use their profits to fund growth and jobs?
The bank levy, major bank levy, which, as you know, applies to 4 big banks and those banks over $100 billion in liabilities, which just means the extra one, which is Macquarie, which is at a much lower level of liabilities, but still above 100. It doesn't apply to the regional banks, to the small banks. It's not levied on deposits, so it's not the reintroduction of financial institutions duty. That's not true. That was on deposits by states. It's not on mortgages. It's not on shareholder capital. It's not, pardon me, on Tier 1 equity. Sorry, Tier 1 capital, which is required to be held by the banks to ensure they're unquestionably strong. All of those things are carved out. And it's very similar to what's done in many other jurisdictions around the world, the Netherlands and others, very consistent with that. And in the UK, they have a similar method of doing this, but they do it a different way. They drop the corporate tax rate, but then have a higher corporate tax rate for the banks. Now, I think this is a better way of doing that. So we're looking to lower the overall rate of tax for all businesses to ensure that drives investment as part of our enterprise tax plan for more and better paid jobs from the growth it supports. But in this specific case, consistent with international practice in many jurisdictions, we are applying this additional levy. Now, in a perfect world, I'm never one who likes putting up taxes on things. But in the era of the achievable in Australian politics, you've got to look at things sometime that aren't always your first preference. Now, we could have said, no, we'll let the debt extend and the deficit extend more years. We could have put the AAA credit rating at risk for that great purpose, which I don't think people would have welcomed, and rightly. Or we could have made this decision. The Parliament made its decision not to accept the additional savings. We can't whine and whinge about that and play political games about it. Let's be honest about it. Rule a line, move on, apply a solution. Now, this isn't about me and the banks or anything like that. Acknowledge our sponsors today. Your sponsors. It's not about that. I mean, we've got to stop looking at these issues as conflicts, and I appeal to the media in that respect. Not everything is about conflict, guys. It's not everything is about personalities. And for people who aren't in this room today, they're sick of that nonsense. They just want a government that is focusing on making the right decisions, and they want the information about the decisions they're making and how they impact on their lives. Enough of the gossip.
Sky News.
David Spears from Sky News. Treasurers, further to that, I appreciate your message there about conflict, but leave the media to one side. Can I ask you about the bank's reaction to this? As I understand it, bank CEOs are writing to their 140,000 staff today to explain what this is going to mean for them. One of the letters I've seen from Ian Narev to Commonwealth Bank staff, he warns that Australian banks are going to be amongst the most highly taxed in the world. He warns it will impact on economic growth, on the strength of the banks. He warns this could hit customers and shareholders and says there is no such thing as a cost being absorbed. You have described this in some of your interviews as a levy for budget repair. Can I just ask, once the budget is repaired, we're back in surplus, does it go?
Well, as you can see, over the next 10 years, we need to maintain the budget in balance and it's not shooting up high on that balance over the next 10 years. Now, I don't find Ian's comments surprising. $1.5 billion is raised, and there's an annual profit of those banks combined of more than $30 billion. Give me a break. That's what Australians will be saying. And with great respect to the bank that's in the room, families absorb costs, small businesses absorb costs, and, you know, this is where I think a company has its value. A company has its value in the way it treats its customers, the services it provides, and how it looks after them. The banks want to send a message to their customers about how much they value them. Don't do what they may be contemplating doing. Don't do it. They already don't like you very much. They don't like us as politicians universally that much either, so we understand your pain. But prove them wrong on this occasion. Prove them wrong. Don't confirm their worst impressions. Tell them another story. Tell them you'll pony up and you'll help fix the budget.
So just briefly on that, two things. They should absorb this, and this is a permanent increase in taxation for them.
Correct. I have to find out whether he wrote to his employees and told them that we're cutting the company tax rate to 25% as well. I'll follow him up with that.
Australian Associated Press.
Treasurer Colin Brinsden, AAP.
Hi, Colin.
Thank you for the speech. And I think people out there don't like us either, but there you go. While we were in the lockup yesterday, share prices on banks fell sharply. In fact, billions was wiped off on the speculation that you were going to introduce this surprise tax cut. Tax levy on the banks. Given the price sensitivity of this issue, didn't that leak make a mockery of the budget lockup? And will you be investigating where that lockup?
John Fain raised this with me this morning. Now, I haven't seen any evidence prior to walking in here today, and certainly when I was doing that interview with John this morning. I mean, you guys have been in budget speculation fever for about 4 months. I mean, there isn't one item in this budget that you haven't speculated on. I've worked it out now how it works with the media. You work out every potential scenario that could possibly happen in the budget, you write it in the paper, and at the end of the day, you know, you've predicted the dawn. Well done. Sun comes up tomorrow. I said it would. Media speculation goes crazy before the budget. I get it, that's fine. And there's been lots of speculation. And if there are serious issues here that need to be addressed, then of course the Secretary and I will be addressing them appropriately. But that'll be on the basis of evidence. Now, in terms of market volatility, well, we've seen that in relation to many things, and markets too, are volatile and they will move about, and we'll see how this pans out. But I notice that Goldman Sachs, the banks will be pleased to know, are still recommending buy.
The Conversation.
Michelle Grattan from The Conversation. Mr Morrison, could I ask you about the Liberals' view of the role of government?
Sorry, Michelle, I missed that.
The Liberals' view of the role of government. Just over a decade ago, John Howard wanted to privatise the federal government's 13% of Snowy Hydro. In this budget, you're interested in trying to buy the whole caboodle. Could you take us through how the Liberals have moved from that position to the current position?
Well, look, I'm not here to give ideological homilies. I'm here to deliver a budget that deals with the practical needs of Australians. But you will know, I mean, John Howard was a very pragmatic Prime Minister and a fine Prime Minister, a very fine Prime Minister, like his Treasurer was a fine Treasurer. They dealt with the things that are in front of them, and as you recall, they decided not to do that. They listened and they decided not to do that. What this discussion we've commenced with New South Wales and Victoria will do, if we can arrive at a conclusion, is it will free up capital that those states have tied up in that company, and they'll be able to put that capital into infrastructure works in their states. Seems like a smart idea if we can make that happen. Freeing up that capital and ensuring that more roads, more bridges, more rail, all of these things can be supported in their states. And at the same time, the Commonwealth and the Prime Minister, as you know, a frustrated engineer, as we all know in the Cabinet he is. No one knows more about pumped hydro in this place, I suspect, than the Prime Minister. I was in Queenstown a little while ago for the meetings with the New Zealanders, and Arthur and I were travelling to a meeting, and we were looking around all these mountains and hills, and I said, I bet you the Prime Minister's seeing pumped hydro stations all the way around these hills. But we have got big plans, quite seriously, for Snowy 2.0. This is the gold standard in nation-building infrastructure, and its day is coming around again because of the wisdom of that method of energy storage and how it can make a big impact on energy affordability in this country and boosting the storage capacity, which has been one of the big missing links. So we want to do more with Snowy 2.0. We want to free up the states, if we can agree on the right terms, to build more and do more in their states on infrastructure. And the link between John Howard and Malcolm Turnbull is they both are Prime Ministers to focus on getting things done.
But surely a Liberal Prime Minister would encourage both New South Wales and Victoria to sell Snowy Hydro.
It will stay in public hands.
Network 7.
Treasurer Tim Lester from the Seven Network. I think in all four of the Coalition's federal budgets now, foreign aid has either been cut or frozen for a couple of years, I think, this year. I think our foreign aid is now less than, as a proportion of national income, less than half Great Britain's. At what point as Treasurer in the future do you think you will say enough foreign aid has to have some budget priority?
Well, it still remains a very significant priority for the government, and we still invest considerably, particularly in supporting our near neighbours. Not just because that's the right thing to do for our neighbours, and particularly in Papua New Guinea and through the Pacific. Our foreign aid budget is actually growing, as the Foreign Minister reminds me of course it is. But we're spending it even better, Tim. We're spending it much better than we used to. We're partnering better with organisations around the world, and I've seen it. I've had an interest in this issue going back to my first speech in the Parliament, my maiden speech in the Parliament. And when I have the opportunity, and have over the last decade, to be in different parts of the world, I spent a fair bit of time in Papua New Guinea and Sri Lanka. I remember Julie and I were there together. I won't tell that story, Julie.
Please do.
But we visited an amazing homes project, I remember, with Sri Lankan families out near Mullaitivu in Sri Lanka, which was being supported by our aid work. So our people do great jobs, but it's got to be all within our means. And Australians expect us to continue to be able to deliver the services here at home, and that is our top priority. But we are a compassionate nation, and I look forward to the day where we can be more generous. We're a prosperous country, we're a strong country, and we're a generous country. And we will stick to those values.
Network 10.
Paul Bongiorno, Treasurer. Today, no less a personage than Alan Jones gave the Prime Minister the rounds of the kitchen table on the credibility of the budget's forecast. He came up with compelling evidence that the forecast struggled to last 6 months, let alone to the next budget, or even the end of the 4-year forward estimates. Are you inclined to follow the fashion of the United States and indeed the United Kingdom and have an independent agency like the Parliamentary Budget Office do the forecasts independent of the Treasurer and the Finance Minister of the day?
Thanks, Paul. I have great confidence in the Treasury and their ability and their work that they do in this area, and I think over the last 2 years in particular, I've been very comfortable working with the Treasury in what they've called on these issues. I mean, you go back to December of last year, we together, the Treasury took the decision to make the call on how we were going to forecast on commodity prices. Now, they departed from the previous practice. They knew they weren't going to stay at that level, and guess what? Pretty right. Not many people get that one right. We did. And the forecast we have in this budget, whether it's on wages or indeed on growth, particularly for the current year, we've actually taken them down since the mid-year statement. Haven't put them up, we've put them down. And on top of that, our forecast for our growth and for global growth are actually less than what the IMF is saying. And our forecasts sit very much in the middle of the pack when it comes to consensus forecasts in this country. So there's some evidence that I think back in the judgments that Treasury have made. They're a professional organisation. As a Treasurer, I have the privilege to see just how professional they are, and I have great confidence in their Secretary and the entire team to keep doing that job well for Australia, as they've done for a very long time.
But why would wages, which have been so flat for the last 7 years, grow so remarkably in the next 3?
Well, we actually took down the wage growth forecast from what we had in December, and they remain, as I said, in line with consensus forecasts in the country today.
But your expectation is they're going to grow?
Yes, because we're investing in a growing economy and the global economy is improving, and that's consistent with what we're seeing both here and overseas.
Radio 2CC.
Treasurer Tim Shaw from Radio 2CC Canberra. Thank you for your presentation. Canberra's tradies say good day, and most of Australia's small business does too. They appreciate the tax cut at 27.5%, the instant asset write-off. They can buy a new ute. But they've never heard of the Moody's.
They've never heard, sorry?
The Moody's. They don't understand the rating system. What they're worried about is their overdraft, and now that you put this tax on the 4 big banks, what can you tell Australian small business about what they can expect in terms of their business overdraft and their profitability? They're already counting their chickens on the tax cut, but what about their overdraft and their interest rate?
Thanks. Look, I've already gone through the key tax message in the budget for small business, so I won't go over those again. And as you know, because they tell me and they tell Michael all around the country that they appreciate that support. And I've already, I think, touched on what my message to the banks is in terms of their business customers. And you know what? If I'm sure there are smaller and regional banks and other banks who'd be happy to take their business if they're not happy with the overdraft rate they're getting from the larger banks. That's about competition. Again, it's not about me and the banks. It's just about competition in the market, and there should be more of it. And we want to encourage that. And we've announced the Productivity Commission inquiry into that issue as well. And we've got a standing ACCC commission there with a team which is full-time, a permanent standing policing of competition in the banking sector. And that's what we've announced in this budget. The other thing we're doing for them in this budget is we've put aside $300 million for cutting red tape for small business. And we've cut a lot of red tape as a Commonwealth Government, but I know that a lot of small business, and Michael knows this, they don't tend to feel it. We've done it, but they really haven't felt it. And their feedback to Michael and through to us was we really need to cut that red tape at the state and territory level and the local level. And that's always been the feedback from my businesses and my electorate in the Shire. And so we're incentivising, rewarding those state governments. And I've had a good chat to Dom Perrottet, my colleague in New South Wales. He might barrack for the Tigers, but he's still a good bloke. And Dom is chomping at the bit, as I know Gladys Berejiklian will be, to be cutting that red tape for small business in New South Wales. And I hope all the other states can chase them and catch them up.
West Australian.
So this is not food past its use-by date?
No, all this is perfectly good product fit for human consumption that would have gone to landfill.
So why does so much of this stuff end up here?
The War on Waste starts Tuesday 8:30, ABC.
Hate missing your favourite shows? Follow Dougie's lead and get Freeview Plus. You can watch all free-to-air catch-up TV on your TV for free. And it's so easy, even a fur child can do it. Keep up with the Freemans. To watch Freeview Plus, press the green button now.
Australian swimming legend Ian Thorpe.
I just knew that there was something not right.
Candid, honest.
I was able to be the person who I am.
And extremely raw.
It's made me want to live a more fulfilling life.
Arns Brush with Fame. Tonight at 8 on ABC and iView.
Tonight on ABC and iView, sporting legend Ian Thorpe opens up on a moving Arns Brush with Fame. Then the weekly, and you can't ask that.
And on ABC2, why are some mannequins headless? Get the answer to that and other philosophical questions on Dirty Jobs.
When you become a Viking, you become somebody else.
Jennifer Byrne, and it is great to have you back for Book Club, and especially this Book Club, because we are starting with the man of the literary moment, George Saunders, acknowledged master of the short story form. His first novel is Lincoln in the Bardo, and I am so looking forward to seeing what you all think about it. As for the classic, a book published some 30 years ago, but which recently, post-President Trump, made it back onto the bestseller lists, along with other dystopian masterpieces. It is Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. So, a warm welcome to trusted clubbers Marique and Jason, and our return guests, fantasy author C.S. Pacat, plus the one and only, check her out, she's a bargain at any price, Zoe Norton-Lodge.
Bargain.
First up, the news. And the latest in the Hogarth Shakespeare series is Tracy Chevalier's retelling of Othello, set in the 1970s, when a young black boy joins an all-white school. And for fans of super sleuth Harry Hurley, Joe Nesbo's latest thriller comes with the strapline, "There's a killer on the streets, he's in your house, he's in your room, he's out for blood." Situation.
Oh, that was a good voice that you used. It was quite scary.
Audiobook,
yeah, you should. Changed accents halfway through, but it was still good. Like, it's still terrifying, yeah.
Well, for audiobook fans, suspense writer Dennis Lehane, Since We Fell, follows a former journalist who gets sucked into a conspiracy thick with deception and violence. And finally, can you believe that half a century has gone by since Joan Lindsay wrote about a party of schoolgirls who went for a picnic? Some never to return. I speak, of course, of the haunting Australian classic, Picnic at Hanging Rock, which marks its 50th birthday this year. Now, I imagine we've all read it. Have we all read it?
Yeah.
Not Zoe? No, fair enough. You're not...
I saw the film.
Everybody saw the film, didn't they?
In fact, Foxtel is filming a 6-part remake right now in Melbourne. OK, so to the big one. George Saunders' extraordinary first novel, Lincoln in the Bardo. Here's what it's about. It's year 1 of the American Civil War, year 2 of Abraham Lincoln's presidency, when his beloved 11-year-old son, Willie, dies from typhoid fever. Stricken with grief, Lincoln returns to the crypt, cradling the boy's body. Ghosts of the dead swirl around them.
You were a joy, he said. Please know that. Know that you were a joy.
Together, the living and the dead embark on an epic battle to save Willie Lincoln's soul. It is a very complicated and particular book, so I don't think we're going to go through all the plots, so let's just talk about it generally. What did you think, Jason?
Well, I loved it. I thought it was magnificent, actually. I mean, it's written in such a way that it seems to me completely unique, the way it's written. It's written in there's a cast of thousands of voices. You're in the Bardo, which is this sort of...
it's sort of purgatory, isn't it?
It's
between
limbo.
Death and life.
Limbo
Yes.
between death, between life and where you go afterwards. So we see Willie comes there, and lots of the characters are ghosts, and they're fantastic. They're voiced beautifully, and there are loads of them as well. But there are 3 main ones. One, a guy who died, committed suicide, and just didn't realise that. Well, he wanted to come back. He wanted life again. Another guy who was who'd married a younger woman, and they were about to consummate their marriage, and he dies. A beam falls on his head. Those are the 2 main ghosts, and along with a priest. And
who basically is in the Bardo because he had a vision of Judgment Day for him, because that's what he had in his mind when he died, and he was so terrified. He scared himself into the Bardo.
But the other, I mean, the great thing about it, apart from the form in which it's written, is the sort of portrayal of grief, of Lincoln's grief, is just, I mean, it's heartbreaking.
I was just streaming with tears about it, because it's part of it is because it is the first year of the Civil War, and so it's both the grief that Lincoln feels for his 11-year-old son who died during a big state dinner, but it's also because they were the same week, I read this, the same week that Willie Lincoln, 11-year-old, died, 1,500 boys died in the Civil War. So you've got this president trying to deal with the horror of the war. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely extraordinary is the word. It's amazing. I mean, you talk about the style of the book and the thousands of characters. What it is a series of vox pop eyewitness accounts of a young boy's death and time in the afterlife. It is characters who say, I was there and this is what I saw. I would say the majority of whom are completely fictional. I don't know if any of the Lincoln servants or anything were real, but it's such a clever idea that I was a bit suspicious of it. I thought, well, this is going to be a bit like The Sellout, which is a series of clever ideas in search of a narrative, right? I thought, oh, well, this is going to be, the gloss of this fun idea will wear off. And it didn't. Yeah. That's incredible. It just gets more powerful. And to tell a story that's about grief, to tell a story that's about a fictional afterlife, and to do it in the mouths of eyewitnesses is just, who comes up